Today's podcast is brought to you by Audible. Get a free audiobook download and a 30-day free trial at audibletrial.com/spookshow. Over 180,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or MP3 player. Sometimes here on the All-American Spook Show Horror Podcast, we pause to focus on the masters, subjects, and icons that make the horror genre so great. So join us this week for the Spook Show Spotlight. Hello and welcome to yet another edition of the All-American Spook Show Horror Podcast. I'm Josh. I'm joined here with Donnie.
Hey.
And the Professor Smoke.
What's up?
Will is usually with us, but as per usual here lately, he's on assignment, so he's not going to be here today. But today we're taking another special time out to have another guest on, since it's kind of our unofficial Canon Films month. We say that, but just because we kind of tripped and fell into this whole Canon thing this month. Like we decided a little ways out to watch New Year's Evil, and then just randomly we did a Canon poll over on our Patreon, and then 10 to Midnight won it. So we're like, all right, well, let's just, spend some extra time and get a couple guests on and talk about Canon Films and, what it means to all of us and just kind of some background and history of it and all that. And we had Paul Talbot on, a couple weeks ago. So now we're here to introduce author Austin Trunick, who wrote The Canon Film Guide, Volume 1, 1980 through 1984. Austin, thanks for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm eager to be here.
Basically, I guess we'll just talk about what your history is with Canon, some of your favorite Canon stuff, about this book, the books you have coming out, all that kind of stuff, that's what we'll get into today. So I guess, we'll start off as simple as what's your history with Canon Films?
Well, I grew up I came of age, learned to love movies during the video store era. And I had a dad who worked a lot, and really the only time I got to see him was on Fridays when I was a young kid. We'd go to the movie store, we'd rent a stack of movies, you'd be there for 10 minutes and you'd decide everything you were going to watch that weekend and take them home. And yeah, my father I watched a lot of horror movies with him, action movies, especially action movies, Chuck Norris and things like that. So I was familiar with Canon because of that reason. They had these video store boxes that were huge. You couldn't miss them. Always amazing art. They knew how to sell their films. And especially when you're young growing boy, your eyes gravitate towards the stuff that they would put on their covers. And then, I got older and I could rent my own movies. And thankfully, back in the days of the mom and pop video stores, you didn't have to. They were very lenient about renting R-rated movies to 12, 13-year-olds. And so I would rent a movie after school. My buddies and I would go to one of their houses, turn it on in their basement, watch, whether it's, like Reanimator, which you recently discussed, or something like Enter the Ninja, Revenge of the Ninja, movies that I gravitated towards and when it was my days to pick. Those were the kind of things I'd pull off the shelf. And years later, I ended up writing about film as an adult and trying to think back on something that I would want to write about to occupy myself, really be my own project rather than an assignment for somebody else. And I kept gravitating back towards Canon because these are the movies that are the reason why I love movies. I love all sorts of movies now, but I love just the whole thing about watching a movie because of those trips to the video store with my dad and renting Chuck Norris movies, really. Bronson.
So is that why you naturally decided to write a book about Canon, or was it just because there isn't really a lot of books specific to Canon out there, at least not that I've seen many of them?
Yeah, there really aren't. And that's what surprised me. There you get, especially when DVDs and Blu-rays were coming out and you'd have commentaries. You had Mark Hartley's documentary about Canon that he put out a few years ago. And you hear all these incredible stories, these directors and actors telling these wild, insane, hard to believe tales about the producers, Golan and Globus. And yeah, I was surprised there wasn't more of a book out there that was just about these, outside of Electric Boogaloo, which is a fantastic documentary, and the Go-Go Boys, the one they produced to compete with Electric Boogaloo. Yeah. And Paul Talbot's two excellent Bronson books. There's not really any great comprehensive book on the subject. So yeah, at that point, I just started writing these things and writing what became some of the chapters in these books. and started reaching out for interviews. And once you do one interview, you'd want to talk to another person, or they'd suggest somebody you should talk to. And it just snowballed from there. Originally, it was going to be one book of my 50 favorite canon movies and the stories behind them. And eventually I wanted to write about as many as I could. And by the time the project's done, it's going to be well over 100 of their movies, and hopefully over 100 interviews.
Yeah, speaking of the interviews, like first off, you've got the foreword by Sam Furstenberg in the
Mhm.
book. That is
That's
awesome,
pretty
and you got an
awesome.
interview with him too. But how cool was that to get to talk to him?
It was amazing. Sam's one of the coolest, nicest people who ever worked in movies that I've ever interacted with.
Hmm.
And I've never met anyone who has a story about him losing his temper or getting cross or anything like that. He's just the nicest guy. And yeah, he was a huge support because he's someone who put me through in contact with a lot of people and was willing to provide photos and things like that. But yeah, he especially, I mean, his story is so tied in with canon. He worked with Golden Globus from before they came to canon, and really he was there the whole time until really the whole thing fell apart. And being a young filmmaker, he could make these movies that, even though they had a low budget, were very, he got a lot of bang for his buck, a lot of extra production value out of these small budgets. And he's just a great filmmaker and super, super nice guy. I'm extremely grateful for everything he's done for me, helping out in these books.
Yeah, I've actually got a copy of the book right here.
Oh, awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. Some of the interviews you got in here were with actress Lisa London, Catherine Mary Stewart, let's see, Diane Franklin, Joe Rubbo. Is that how you say his name? Rubbo?
Yeah, I believe so. Rubo.
Rubbo, actor Andrew Stevens, Luigi Cozzi, Marella D'Angelo. I mean, there's tons of others, man. I mean, even Boogaloo Shrimp. Uh, that's awesome. I mean, like, what do you think, like, as far as, like, the ones that you got to interview there? I mean, obviously some of the bigger names, like Boogaloo Shrimp, Catherine Mary Stewart, something like that. What was your favorite interview of the ones you did, or are there any interesting tidbits that you didn't get into the book from any of those interviews that you got for it?
Well, I mean, Sam Furstenberg was an amazing one because he had every story. Catherine Mary Stewart's a great one because she became sort of this 80s cult icon, and that would never have happened had Menachem Golan just sort of saw her in line somewhere and pulled her in and forced her to auditions. And she was also someone who believed in me. Her and Lisa Linden, both very early in the book, but were just, at that point, I was just some guy
Yeah.
claiming I wanted to write a book, 5, 6 years ago. And they took the chance on me first. There's ones in the second one that I'm actually just kind of in the very last stages. It's all in layout. I'm going through and correcting, little names here and there that may have been off and making sure the pictures are in the right place. But the second volume, I got to talk to Wings Hauser, which was amazing. Michael Dudikoff is another guy who I never dreamed of getting, but
Awesome.
once the first one was out there, it was easier to get people to
Yeah.
participate.
True.
Bill Moseley is some guy, as somebody who grew up watching horror movies, someone who was just an awesome person to talk to. And Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 was the movie that really it made him an actor, but also not just an actor, but sent him down just this path of making horror movies,
Yeah.
that being what he's known for.
Yeah, now he's like a horror icon.
Yeah.
really like
Straight
a
up.
film icon, straight. But definitely a
Yeah.
horror icon for sure.
More so.
That's awesome though. Yeah. Like, were there anything like kind of like like I said, left off the table that anything interesting that you heard that you didn't leave in, or that didn't make it to the book?
Yeah,
Well,
like covering your floor.
Yeah, well, as far as the interviews, I try not to cut them too much, unless there were cases where people would be like, "Oh, I shouldn't have
Right.
mentioned this. Can you please retract that?" or something that.
Yeah.
And like a few things where, I mean, anytime you're doing an interview and publishing it anywhere, if you can't confirm from another source, and it could be,
True. Yeah.
I'm not trying to protect people, but
It could be
unless I can,
a one-sided story. You wouldn't want to.
Right.
Yeah.
right. So if I couldn't corroborate a story somewhere else, I would have to make the hard choice to cut it out. But for the most part, I don't touch the interviews too much. I just clean them up a little bit, and they're in there. There's some very long ones in the second one. And a guy who someone I had talked to for the second one, who actually passed away about 4 years ago, is James Karen.
Hmm.
He was in Invaders from Mars, but he's the old man from the Return of the Living Dead movies.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I talked to him right before he passed away,
Wow.
and he had stories about, quitting acting for a while to go fight in World War II and understudying Marlon Brando, and just some amazing tales. And that was one that I talked to him for almost 2.5 hours. And there's
Wow,
there's
that's
things
awesome.
I had to. So someday when that is, once the book is out, I might look for a place to post the rest of the stuff that I
Yeah,
caught that wasn't
maybe
really
like
canon.
volume four, the cutting room floor, or something like something like that. How long did it take you to write this? I guess this first one, and then now these subsequent books.
It was about 4 years between when I started and when the second one was actually accepted for publication. So I've been at it all together since 2015. It's hard to say because I started writing it out of order. So there are certain things like Invasion USA chapter that's going to be in book two.
Hmm.
I actually started writing, I wrote the bulk of that chapter back in 2016. Just so it's sort of, it's hard to say, but yeah, 7 years in total.
Is it safe
And the
to say
second
that?
one will be out this spring.
That's what I was going to say here in a second. But like, is it safe to
Mhm.
say this probably started off as something like, here are a handful of my favorite movies, and then it just kind of grew into, you know what, let's just do the whole thing kind of thing, or
Absolutely.
yeah,
There, because once you find out about one story, you hear one story from somebody, and then you end up seeking out another movie. And canon's something that you can keep scratching and getting deeper and deeper and deeper. And they put out so much I think in at their height, they were putting out almost a film every week, which is crazy to think. Yeah, I would watch something and it would make me seek something else out. And it happened pretty early that I just decided, okay, I've got to do as much as I can, try to capture all that I can.
so
Yeah,
you've
it
got
grew
so you've
fast.
got so you've got this one. This one's what, almost 600 pages, give or take. Yeah, well, 500 and something,
Mhm.
508, I guess. Not counting like the appendix in the back or whatever. But so you've got two more coming, right? I assume they'll probably be about similar length, give or take.
Actually, the second one is substantially bigger. It's going to be a doorstop as far as the size.
It's like
The
Lord of the Rings, about 5 years of canon films.
Yeah. Well, it covers 85 through 87, so it's just 3 years.
Oh
But
wow,
during that time, they were
true. That's
putting
when.
out multiple movies in one weekend, competing against
Yeah,
themselves.
I think that's when they cranked out like what, almost 50 in one year or something like that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. 86 was a crazy year at Canon, but yeah. So I'm looking at the layout, and the layout is about 1,000 pages. So it might hit 1,000 by the time you get all the extra, like the back matter, like the index and stuff stuck in there. But just as far as pure text, I think it was 968 pages. I'm
Wow.
excited to get that out there.
Hopefully, not much gets cut out. I'd like to take a gander at the unedited version.
Mm. There's stuff like, especially the James Karen interview, since he passed away afterwards, and
Well, yeah,
it
you
was
had to shorten
only
that up.
that stuff. I'll work to get out there. And a
Uh,
lot of things like for the first book, there's only so much room, especially for pictures and images and advertisements, that a lot of that stuff I stick on Twitter and Facebook now. Just extra things
yeah,
that
yeah.
I learn since the book has been published and stuff that I didn't have room for.
When can we
It's a,
expect? You said the next one would come out in the spring of 2022. You said
yeah,
soon.
yeah,
Yeah,
we're shooting for the spring.
and
So
then
we are in the last couple weeks of actual putting everything together, and then it can start production. So it's not far off now.
good. And
Yeah,
the
that'd
third
be
one,
great, man.
and the third one, I would assume would probably be what, sometime next year or two, something like that.
Third one's going to take me a little while because, like I said, I started writing this thing out of order,
Hmm.
and so certain movies that everybody knows for canon and love, like Invasion USA and Texas Chainsaw 2 and Life Force, stuff that these big sort of tentpole movies over the top, I wrote about before I even had to publish the first one.
Hmm.
Once you get to 88 onwards, I just want to include like basically 88 to 94 is the end of canon. So it's a big chunk, but those are really when canon was in trouble. It's a lot of direct to video movies. Outside of Bloodsport and Cyborg, they're two Van Damme movies. There aren't many big ones that people kind of rally around. So I did not go for writing about those ones first. And the other thing I want to do, which is going to take a little more research, is Canon was big on pre-selling these movies. They would make up posters, make up advertisements, and take them to Cannes, out to different film festivals, and sell the American film market and sell them. And once they had enough people who had bought, 10 to Midnight's a great example. they just had the title and a drawing of Bronson with a gun and a globe and some tagline about fighting terrorists. And they sold that. They made enough money by selling it to Japan, to Italy, to all these different countries, cable, VHS, that they took that and they used it to fund the movie and put the money into other movies. They always made a profit because they rarely spent more on the movies than they had already pre-sold them for. Mm-hmm. But because of this, they would go to these markets and it was like throwing spaghetti at the wall to see what sticks. You'd have these big fat books and folders full of proposals and mocked up advertisements, and sometimes it would just be a photo of Bronson. It says Untitled Bronson Project, and they would take these and sell them. There's no scripts, no ideas or anything like that, but they had so many because so many of these films they just didn't have generate enough interest for them to go forward with making. So I have right now I think it was about 104, I think was the last count of projects that I have either proposals for or advertisements for that Canon had announced and then never got into making. There's a whole different version of American Ninja 3 that they wrote and just never got off the ground.
I remember seeing some of the B-roll in like both those documentaries, the Go-Go Boys and Electric Boogaloo, where like somebody's flipping through a magazine or like a trade or something, and there's those ads, those one-page ads that, some of them I know didn't get made. You could see just when they're flipping through it.
Yeah, and that's I want to put some time into that just because so many of those they have like a name attached. So these are guys that I've, Sam Furstenberg, for example, there's projects that he was announced attached to and then never directed. And James Bruner's another guy who wrote a lot of projects, or they would put his name as writing a script that he never wrote. But I want to take like a good section of that book and be like, these are what these Canon projects that were announced and never made. Here's what Canon's tried to sell them on, and this is what they would have been. This is as much as I can find out about what these movies might have looked like had they gone into production. So sort of this like fantasy Bronson films, Chuck Norris movies that it should have been 80s Chuck Norris movies that were never made. And it's fun to look at that stuff.
Do you get into, like, say in the second volume or possibly thinking about in the third one, get into the I guess scandals or the the stuff that with the SEC probe and all that kind of stuff toward the kind of the bitter end of things? Do you really get into that at all, or?
Yeah, that starts really at the end of the second volume, at the end of 87, because they had the SEC probe. You had all these articles and stuff blowing up that they were misreporting all of what they were investing in the movies and how much the movies were making. And that was really after they had purchased the Thorn EMI and Elstree Studios and all these different things. Basically spent all this money that they've been given to make movies, all this credit that they had been advanced, and blew it on real estate, which was a terrible idea. Yeah. But so that stuff happens, and that stuff kind of blew up in their face in 87. And then 88, you get Giancarlo Peretti coming in, who was really this con man from Italy that buys out MGM. And so that starts really at the end of this second book. And in the third one, yeah, it's gonna have to cover it because that's a huge part of why Canon went from making these, I wouldn't say big, but they're mid-budget movies, to these, back to the $1, $2, $3 million movies they had started with that went straight to video. You can just see this heavy climb and then just sudden drop. Yeah. Like a rock in 87.
And once again, you do see that, and I think it's in the Electric Boogaloo documentary where they get his interview, Golan's interview, where he's saying like, I couldn't spend $30 million on a movie. I don't see how I could do this. And then it shows like the budgets for 2 or 3 movies that were like, 20, 25 million, Superman 4, I guess, right? So, some of the ones at the tail end. They just kind of overextended themselves, I guess.
Yeah, and those, it all sort of happened at once. You can see, especially it's fun writing about these. Like you have Superman 4 and Masters of the Universe are 2 big examples where Canon was shooting these films and they had budgets at one point and the budgets just run out. There's a Assassination is what they were shooting with Bronson at the time, and they literally had to rip pages out of the script that they couldn't shoot. It's a very trimmed down ending. But Masters of the Universe, very famously, they had a guy ready to pull the plug. They had a goon there working to pull the plug at the last shoot, and it happened when they were filming the last fight with Skeletor, so the movie almost didn't really have an ending. They had to like stay after late, and it's a wild story. But you can see certain films where Superman 4, where they had a budget of around 30 million to start and went with almost half that.
Yeah, and you can
once
see
they
it.
actually went to make it.
And you can see
Yeah,
it.
you can see it. Yeah, you can absolutely see the difference.
I remember even when I was a kid watching that, you know, because that came out. What year did that come out? 87, 88?
That was 87, yeah.
So I was seven or 8 years old when that came out. Even then, I'm like, this doesn't look like the other ones, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I guess that'll lead us into the more fun topics. You know, we don't want to dwell on the bitter end. I mean, I'm sure we'll get to that, like you said in your third book, and you know, there's enough of that. Especially like, you know, I'll bring up those two documentaries again. You can definitely see there's a skewed view in both. You know, when you watch them, like, you know, they're very positive and they got a good outlook on themselves and the things that they accomplished in their own documentary. Meanwhile, the other one was just, here's all the people that they, you know, probably they wronged in some way, and now they're just, you know, just slinging shit at them. You know, at least that's the way it seemed to me.
No.
Yeah, and I've encountered the same thing. You have people who, I'll bring up a Canon movie and it'll clearly bring up bad memories and they won't want to talk about it. And then people talking about that, you can bring up the same movie to somebody else who worked on it and they'll be super excited. It was a great opportunity. And you know, there are the people who didn't get their checks on time, and there are the people who always got paid on time. So
you can definitely tell there's two different kinds of reactions. It's like you say Canon Films to one person, like, oh shit, Canon Films, and then another person's like, Canon Films, they're awesome, you know. So I guess we all fall on that side of the spectrum, you know, here. But it is interesting, you know, like there's not many in between, right? Like they were okay, but you know, that kind of thing. You don't hear that very often. You love it or you hate it, kind of.
Mm-hmm. It seems to be very like a poles.
Yeah.
One side or the other you fall onto.
Time for refreshment. Refreshment. For your enjoyment, there's hot, fresh popcorn, tempting, delicious hot dogs, and so many kinds of ice cream. And of course, sparkling, delicious, ice-cold Coca-Cola for everybody at the refreshment counter now.
So, you know, just some other random questions that we had. What was your first Canon film you ever saw in the theater, or like say on VHS, you know, back in the day?
Okay, well, I gotta go back a ways. I didn't live near a movie theater, so I saw very few movies as a kid. I grew up out in Ohio, kind of middle of nowhere. So everything I saw was on VHS until I hit, you know, much older age. But so I mean, Invasion USA might be it. There are movies that I remember seeing. I have very distinct memories of seeing as a kid, just the cover. But yeah, Invasion USA is one. Masters Universe, because I was a kid and I remember being excited to rent that and being a little confused why it didn't look or seem anything like the cartoon.
Oh yeah. I remember my brother and I, because once again we were about the same age, when 7 or 8. Something like that when that came out, and we're just like, who are these characters? You know, who's this?
I don't remember that.
Who's this Gwildor guy?
Where's Orko?
Yeah. That was the first. Like, they got this guy Gwildor, but where's Orko? Clearly, they didn't want to spend the money on, you know, some special effect to make a flying ghost guy. You know.
Yeah, that was a movie that they knew what the budget they had, and they knew where would be the most effective places to put it.
That being said, we watched the cover.
They managed to stick the song in there though. "Living in a Box."
Oh God!
And Masters of the.
Yep, every time. That damn song.
Oh my God!
But okay, I guess another question for you. Pick one favorite from the first 5 years of Canon. So, like, you know, more specific to this book that you wrote.
Oh, I mean, that's easy. That's Revenge of the Ninja for me. That is a movie that, like, even though I didn't see it super young, I remember seeing the cover and then getting to be a little bit older where I go to the video store by myself or with some buddies. That was one of the first movies I grabbed, because that cover is, I got it over here somewhere, but one of the most beautiful pieces of artwork in my opinion. You have
Oh yeah.
a ninja who seems to be, I don't know if he was dropped out of a helicopter or if he can fly, but he's clearly several
I think it's both.
several hundred meters above the Salt Lake City, I think is where they are in that one.
Nothing like those
shooting a gun and throwing shurikens at the same time. It's wonderful. And what 10-year-old boy does not just obsess over this cover?
Everyone knows about the deep legends of the Salt Lake City Ninjas.
Oh man! So with that, actually, would you say that would be your favorite Cannon film, or do you have another favorite?
I mean, it's a tough question, but definitely a top. It's up there in top 5. And yeah, if somebody were to ask me to pick my number 1 favorite Cannon movie, it would be. I would grab Revenge of the Ninja. There are some that are up there that are close, but that's number 1 for me.
Honestly, I don't even know if I can answer that. Like, I don't know if I have one in particular. Like, yep, this is the one. I don't know. That's tough because there's a lot of really good ones, for our scale, so to speak, right? Like we often tell guests on the show, like our scale is like, for instance, Smoke, he gave Reanimator 5 stars. So like that's kind of 0 to 5 stars is our scale. So if Reanimator's 5 stars, kind of that's where the gauge of everything else is, right? Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of movies that Cannon made that are going to be higher on our scale than they would be on your regular, like if you're pitting it against The Godfather or something like that.
Right. Yeah, I mean there are a bunch that I love, and I think also when you're writing a book and kind of watching these movies over and over again, 4 or 5, 6 times, for some of the ones that I wasn't familiar with already, your bar lowers a little bit. I think mine has.
Well, yeah. I can say just from reading, what I've read of this book, you're doing the Lord's work, because some of these movies, man, because like you inspired me to kind of go on a little bit of a journey myself and like start watching them, kind of from the beginning and going through it or whatever. And man, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hype, The Apple, Lady Chatterley's Lover, man, god damn, I'm sorry, they suck.
There are some that are really, really rough, even. And like I said, like if I've got to watch them several times to write about them, some of them are a real chore. I'm not going to pretend. I do love Cannon. I do grade their movies on a scale personally, but even me, there's some bad ones in there.
Sorry if I'm a giggling mess over here. Anytime Josh has any sort of misery, I just revel in it. Yeah. I
just laughing at Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hype.
Yep.
I think, like, out of the ones I've watched so far, other than just some ones I've watched in the past, man, that's got to be the worst, because it's over the top. It's too over the top. I don't even know, like, it's not even funny. It's so over the top,
Yeah. That one's rough. I probably if I were to pick my worst one in the first volume, there's a movie in there called Secret of Yolanda. That is hard to get through.
I guess I'll get there eventually, if I don't bail sometime. Like, I'm actually watching Lady Chatterley's Lover, like, right now. I'm like about more than halfway through it. Yeah, I mean, there might be a point where I have to jump off, I'm not writing a book, so I'm like, fuck this, I'm out. But hey, you never know. I mean, I'll keep going as long as I can stomach it.
You have to let me out.
That also, what would you say would be the most underrated Cannon film? Maybe it got a little bit too much flack. Maybe it didn't exactly deserve as much flack as it got. What would you say was the most underrated, and why do you think it's underrated?
Oh, this is probably cheating a little bit, but one that, because it's one of the few movies that Cannon made that got Oscar nominations, but Runaway Train I feel is very underseen. I think it's an amazing film, not just for Cannon. I mean, the idea that it came from Cannon is awesome, and it's great for them. But it's just a movie that is just a wonderful, tense, thrilling film with some great performances in it, and that's one that was relatively tough to see until Blu-ray just came out last year, and that's one that, I mean, if anybody hasn't seen that from Cannon, it's not one of the more obscure ones, but it's one that I definitely like. Just watch this if you haven't. If I can grab somebody and have them shake them and have them watch something, because it's also one that I don't think you have to be someone who's already inclined to watch ninja movies or Charlie Bronson movies to
Yeah.
really get something out of that one.
Yeah, I'd say that goes for a lot of their movies, honestly. Though you kind of have to like that kind of stuff already, to really
Mm.
get it, or find it more entertaining than your average flick. That's for sure.
Hmm. And there's, I mean, there's bunches of them that I'll you can tell usually by how much time I dedicate, how many pages I dedicate to the book. Because usually, if I'm more interested in a movie, I write more about it. But there are some in there that have very long chapters and that are kind of lesser known films, just personally because it interested me, the story behind it. And if I could watch the film multiple times and not get tired of it, I tended to write more about it.
Yeah, like I said, some of these, watching them, just the thought of having to watch them 2, 3, 4 times, man. Like, I've seen it once, I'm good, but like, man, good work. That's all I can say. Good work, man.
Thanks.
Oh yeah, Austin. Speaking of lowering the bar, this is going to be canon related, but indirectly canon related, and talking about ninja movies in the video stores. I'm sure that at some point, if you're a fan of ninja movies, of course you saw Enter the Ninja, Revenge of the Ninja, Ninja 3. At some point, you probably came across Godfrey Ho's movies, something like Ninja Terminator or something. You rent this, you're thinking, oh wow, I saw Ninja 3. Let me rent Ninja Terminator. That's got to be great.
Full Metal Ninja, Ninja the Protector.
Yeah.
I remember those two. I don't know what other ones they had at my video store, but I remember those two covers because they had the shiny like foil.
Yeah, the shiny
covers, like the swords always sort of lit up, and yeah, I mean those you definitely. I rented a few of those and had a hard time making sense of them, and you get to be older, and then you realize that these are the same 30 films that get chopped up and recut together.
I have a bit of a soft spot for them in my later years now. I mean, I can watch them for, just for the entertainment value of them. Of course, back then when you were younger, you feel like you got duped into, renting it, and you're like, oh.
Yeah.
I can watch them now, in retrospect.
Yeah, they're fun. That's something. I wonder if I hope somebody out there is working on a book about the Godfrey Ho Empire.
Yeah, because you definitely don't want to work on that, right?
No.
That's not next for you, right?
No, that's for somebody else. Somebody else can take that one.
Yeah.
I've got way too many direct-to-video canon movies ahead of me. I might not want to watch anymore.
Donnie, maybe that's what you can work on next. You can.
Nah, negative.
We're about to start two new series. Kind of like one's going to be for Patreon, and another one's going to be for like the main podcast feed. Because basically our pattern is like we watch an older horror movie and then a newer horror movie like every 2 weeks. We go back and forth, and our line of embarkation is 1999 back is considered old, and then 2000 up is considered new. But we're gonna kind of interject some like cult movies and stuff, because mostly we've done a couple of like random non-horror cult movies, but one of the series that we're gonna start interjecting, we're gonna call it Cult Corner, where we'll get to see a lot of these, maybe some kung fu movies, ninja movies, stuff like that. Just interject some different kind of stuff in there. So look for that soon. So we're going to be mixing it up, so maybe we can get into some of his movies when we start doing that. Now, another one that we're going to be doing for Patreon is we're going to call it Crapster Piece Theater, where this is going to be the worst. like The Apple, for instance. Like, just the worst stuff, and then you can listen to us talk about those over on our Patreon. But
I'll look for it.
Yeah, mixing it up with some new stuff. But I just figured I'd throw that out there. We'll be coming more into your neck of the woods with the cult movies and stuff here pretty soon.
Oh, that's great.
Of course, Canon had a lot of good horror movies as well, but mostly they're known for the breakdancing movies and the ninja and that kind of stuff. But
yeah, they did surprisingly. I mean, for as many movies as they put out, surprisingly few horror movies. They also never did a Western, which is a shock. I mean, that was out of fashion by the 80s, but you think of all the genres they did, they never touched the Western. But yeah, their horror movies early on, they did a bunch because they were kind of more into lean more into that sort of like grindhouse drive-in sort of audience. But that's where you get New Year's Evil, which I listened to you guys talking about pretty recently.
Yep.
And you had Hospital Massacre, aka X-Ray. You had 10 at Midnight, which I'll qualify.
Yeah, Schizoid, right? I mean, that would kind of
Schizoid. Yeah, and but after that, like they kind of you have something like Life Force, which has some horror elements, but is more science fiction zombie movie, maybe if you stretch it.
Hmm.
And then Ninja 3 The Domination, which has, it's ninja movie slash dance movie slash exorcism movie.
That movie is nuts.
Crazy. But
that was kind of like they said, let's take Enter the Ninja, Breakin', and Exorcist and make a movie out of that.
Yeah, every episode of the Professor, when he does his Patreon episode, Library of the Professor, you always see the Ninja 3 Domination poster off his right shoulder.
You can see it there. Yeah.
Always there.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the one they put out for the Blu-ray, I believe it was. I forget right now who released the Blu-ray, but they had this thing where if you send it in, you could get a free poster. That's not the original poster, but the Blu-ray re-release poster, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's a fun movie. That's another Sam Furstenberg classic there.
Yeah.
But
we'll get to it.
They actually did. I mean, you want to include House of the Long Shadows? I have that one handy here.
That's the one with Vincent Price and stuff, right?
Vincent Price, yeah. Peter
Cushing
and
John Carradine, Christopher Lee.
Christopher
The only time all four of those guys work together, and I got some cool photos. You see all the time of the four of them, and they came from the production of that one. That one's a funny movie because it was sort of made originally in the vein of, with the old Hammer type or classic, 50s, 60s horror movies. But when they went to release it, Canon kind of recut it and tried to market it as a 80s horror movie. And it was not that. It was kind of just a send up of the older ones. But the version we got ended up being kind of a butchered version, unfortunately.
You mentioned it a minute ago, but I guess now's as good a time as any to maybe get your thoughts on it. Like you said, we just recently did New Year's Evil, like back at the beginning of the year, and then literally just a week, it'll be last week when we did 10 to Midnight. So could you give us maybe any thoughts on either one of those movies, any interesting tidbits or anything like that, and then maybe even your own personal star ratings on those?
Well, New Year's Evil, I mean, there are things I love. I love the soundtrack. You get the same song over and over again.
What soundtrack? It's just one damn song over and over.
It's a catchy song, though.
Well, I'll give you that. Yeah, it's like it gets in there and just burrows into your brain for the next week.
Yeah, that was one of the few releases. Canon put that out on 45 on their own Canon records, which they were sure it was going to be a hit song, and it didn't. I'm sure there's some landfill somewhere full of.
I was about to say Smoke probably has them with all the extra copies of E.T. from Atari.
Yeah. It's out in the New Mexican desert, I'm sure. But the New Year's Evil, I mean, I like that I think it's kind of cool that they show the bad guy like right away. They don't make you guess at who he is or what he looks like. You first see him, he's on the phone without a mask on, talking in a funny voice. I like that they lean into the holiday. That's cool. And it was shot in 3 weeks. And like in October of that year and put out before New Year's, which is crazy. How do you so I'll again, it's a Canon scale, but if we were to compare it to, you mentioned 10 to Midnight is in my opinion, a far, far better movie. That's probably my favorite of Bronson's Canon movies. And he made a lot of them, but I do like it's this kind of hybrid of this police procedural and a slasher that it becomes at the end. So I'm a huge fan of 10 to Midnight. So if you ask me to compare them, I would put 10 to Midnight like very high. And if we're grading on a Canon scale, that's a 5 for me. And New Year's Evil is 2.5 for being generous, somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, that sounds about like what we all kind of thought about
New
Year's Evil.
Yeah, it was pretty much right on.
Yeah.
All right, well, I'm looking forward to listening to that.
Yeah.
I haven't heard the 10 to Midnight episode yet.
Yeah.
I'm excited.
Josh and Willie, who's actually, as we mentioned earlier, on assignment, both of them are lifelong comic collectors, and you used to work for DC Comics. So, what was that like? Do you have or do you have a favorite memory from your time there?
I mean, DC was awesome. I worked with some great people. That was while they were in New York. I worked with them some of those last years before they moved out to Los Angeles. I got to meet a lot of my. I mean, I grew up a comic fan and got to meet a lot of the people that I really loved. One of my memories, and I got to meet some really cool people, but one that very personally for me is having grown up. The one comic book that I would always buy is the old Marvel Transformers books, and right at the end, Simon Furman wrote this really kind of cool, like epic space opera run. He took it off of Earth, and Transformers were spread all on different planets with different things going on. And the British writer and somebody that I loved his stuff. And one San Diego, I was out working because I worked in PR, so we'd go out to dinner and stuff with people. But I came back to the hotel, and Simon Furman was there, just sitting at the bar. He had just come back, and I got to sit down and introduce myself. And just he's somebody. My favorite comic book stories I read as a kid, and just getting to sit and have a drink with him, and that was so cool. And there are other people that I love and memories I'll cherish. I got to work a lot with Darwyn Cooke, who passed away a while back, but was a great comics writer and illustrator, and wrote some of my favorite DC superhero tales. But yeah, like there were just tons of people. And part of my Mad Magazine also was published by DC, and so that was one of my specific areas that I had worked on. That was where I did their PR for several years, and just getting to go down to the Mad Magazine offices is something. If you grew up in the 80s and you grew up in the 90s, and those comics, those were something that felt very transgressive every time you'd open them, even though they'd be, pretty like Weird Al level of, like, they were pretty tame back then. But those guys, they always would call themselves the Usual Gang of Idiots. How they signed all the letterhead and the masthead inside the books, and getting to work with the Usual Gang of Idiots on a regular basis was very cool.
That's awesome. Yeah, I was a huge fan of, like, obviously, like Johnny said, comic books, but Mad Magazine, and growing up as well. Every once in a while, I still pick up an issue, because they actually stopped making, like, new issues, right? I think, of Mad Magazine, but they still,
for a little while. Yeah, actually, while I was there, they had ceased for just like a very short amount of time. They would come and go, and that was one of the most heartbreaking PR stories to have to work on.
Yeah, that's.
But yeah, Mad is definitely holds a special place in my heart. Those guys were all super funny too, and some of them, Al Jaffe was the guy who did the folding pages in the back that you would turn and then make a different picture. And he'd been doing that since forever, since pretty much almost since the beginning of Mad in the 50s, and just super nice guy, super sharp, and always would always be coming into the office on a regular basis, which is amazing when you're that old at that point.
Yeah, that was one of the things I was going to say. When the term Mad Magazine just came up, the first thing I was thinking of was those folded, back. It was always the back page, right? The back of the magazine where you'd fold it. Going in the grocery store, my parents, I used to hate having to go to the grocery store. They take me along, and I'd go to the magazine section, and then that's where I'd read each issue of Mad that came out. And if I could convince them to buy it for me, I'd buy the issue too. But every one of those back issues was always folded, so you could never even get in the grocery store. You'd never find one that didn't have it folded.
Yeah, I'm sure for people who try to collect them like comic books, that's got to be the biggest pain in the butt.
You would think so.
You want your mint condition copy, but everyone's just creased that back cover.
Yeah, you're right. Anytime you'd go back and look for one, like every one would be already folded. Like, damn it, where's the other one? I would always try to fold them as carefully as possible. So I'm like, oh, there's the picture, and then kind of put it back and smooth it out. Yeah, cool, man. It's been a lot of fun talking to you. We don't want to hold you up any longer. We definitely appreciate you coming on and taking a little stroll through Cannon Films and your book. Where can everybody find you on the internets, and where can they pick up the book and everything?
All right, it's at Cannon Film Guide on both Twitter and Facebook. And like I said, I'm posting on there all the time, and it's all stuff that is either stuff I've learned since the book or things that didn't make it. So a lot of fun advertisements. It's a good way to keep the conversation going. If anybody ever has Cannon questions, I'm more than happy to, they ping me in either place to to chime in and answer where I can. And the book is, yeah, I mean, you can get it from bearmanormedia.com or Amazon or really anywhere that sells books. Your local bookstore can order a copy for you.
Yeah, it's good work, man, for real. Like, I'm not deep into it. I'd say at most maybe a quarter of a way through it. And watching some of the movies myself and everything. You did a really good job on it, no doubt.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much.
A lot of these books, not to blow smoke up your ass or anything, but a lot of these kind of books you see are just like, here's a little blurb about the movie. This is maybe a poster. Here's when it came out. Next movie, flipping. I mean, you really went in depth, talking about the plots of the movie and the background information and these interviews and everything. You did a really good job on it, man.
Thank you. That means a lot. That really does. Thank you.
It'll be an excellent source, not only here for the show for years to come, I'm sure, but just watching the movies and wanting to find out some more information and stuff. It's a good pull. So I would highly recommend all the listeners and everyone out there to go find this, track the book down, check it out. It's called The Cannon Film Guide, Volume 1, 1980 through 1984 by Austin Trunick. Thanks for coming on, man. It's been a blast.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
All right, yeah. So I guess that'll pretty much wrap it up here for this week on the All American Spook Show Horror Podcast. And next week we'll be watching whichever movie won the Valentine's Day Patreon poll. That will be coming out next week. So we don't, as the recording of this, we don't have the official winner yet. So I'm not going to say, but it will be one of the three choices between Valentine, Pontypool, and help me out, one of you guys. What was the third option?
My Bloody Valentine, the remake.
Yeah, Bloody Valentine. 2009. So it'll be one of those three. That's all we can say for now. So come back next week for that, and always go back to the archives and everything else that we've got there. You can listen to the other shows that we've done. So for Will, who couldn't be with us, and Donnie and the Professor Smoke, I'm Josh. We are the All American Spook Show Horror Podcast, and we'll talk to you next week.
Please replace the speaker on its rack when you're ready to leave. Failure to do so will damage both the speaker and your car. We'll be grateful, and so will the patrons who follow you.